Hi guys, today we're going to be making this coaster set. Actually, in this tutorial, I'm going to be making this one here. I also explain at the end of the video how I make this one, because once you're able to make this one here, you'll easily be able to make this one because it's just the addition of color, but otherwise the pattern itself stays the same. And I do explain that in detail at the end of the video. But in this one, I am showing how to make this one. I do have a tutorial for this style of the coaster as well, which I will link in the description box. I actually made a whole set. I like having the different patterns of the peppermint. So I have the whole set, but the tutorial for this one, I will link in the description box. So I'll get those out of the way. These coasters are very nice. They're nice and sturdy because I put a back on them. You can see it looks very nice and clean, and it kind of has that natural ridge around the coaster, so I think that's really nice. It's a very nice coaster. And the materials that you're going to need for this pattern are a 3.75 millimeter crochet hook, or an F. If you'd like a smaller coaster, you can use a smaller hook. If you'd like a larger coaster, you can use a larger hook. I used a pair of scissors. I used a needle to sew in my ends, and then you're also going to need a stitch marker. Because we're working in the round, we need to make sure we have a stitch marker to mark the first stitch of each round. This isn't my nicest stitch marker, but I could not find one when I was making these, so a little strand of yarn will work just fine. And as for the yarn that I used, I will put a picture on the screen now. You can do it in any color combo that you like. You can see I did this one in the white and the green, this one the white and the red, and this one I used all three. So if you're just making this one, you'll need 2 separate colors, and if you want to attempt this one as well, you'll need a third. All right, to get started, we're either going to start with a slip knot on our hook. There's 2 ways to get started, so I will show you both. And we're going to chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, slip stitch to that first chain that we made to form a ring. So we'll go right into that chain, yarn over, pull the yarn through that chain and through the loop on your hook, and chain 1. So this is the first way to create a little ring, and sometimes you have to kind of pull it apart a little bit to see where you would put those stitches, but that's where we would put those round 1 stitches into. So you can start by doing that and then skip forward to the round 1, or I'm going to start with a magic ring, and I do love using magic rings, so I do recommend that you give it a try. I will show you how to do it. So you start with your yarn between your pointer finger and your thumb, like so, and we're going to wrap that working yarn around our 2 fingers and back up over top of that yarn that's already on top of your 2 fingers, and then I'm going to hold that working yarn over here with my ring finger. So we've created an X on top of our 2 fingers. And at this point, I'll bring in my hook, and I'm going to go underneath this side of the X and over top of this side of the X, which again is that working yarn. And I'm going to grab that yarn and pull it underneath. But while I pull it underneath, I'm going to turn my hook. So I twisted my hook around, and that created a loop on top of my hook. And then I'm going to grab that working yarn and pull it through to chain 1. And at this point, we can remove it from our fingers, and we've created a magic ring. And we're going to work our stitches into this ring. So the chain 1 in both of those situations that I just showed does not count as a stitch, but otherwise we'll go on. And even if you did the chain 4 method and slip stitch to that first chain and chained 1, we're going to do the same when I talk about working into the center of the ring. So for round 1, it's 12 double crochets into the center of the ring. So we will yarn over, go into that ring, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops, yarn over, pull through those final 2 loops. So I'm going to do that 12 times total. That was the first. That's my second double crochet, 3, and I'll come back on when I have 12 in the center of the ring. All right, I have my 12 double crochets in the center of the ring, and at this point you're going to grab your tail. No matter how you started your ring, it will work the same on both. And if you grab that tail and pull it as hard as you can, so I'm giving it everything I got, that center opening should close up really nicely. So, and if it doesn't, there's still a little bit of a gap there, we can go ahead afterwards and use this tail to sew around that center, and it will close it up completely. So at this point, we are going to be working in the round, so you want to make sure that you have a stitch marker. I'm just going to use this little piece of yarn. I couldn't find my stitch marker. So we're going to go into that first stitch of the round, and we want to make sure that we're not going into that initial chain 1, which did not count as a stitch, but the first actual double crochet of the round. And if you need to, you can count back 12 stitches just to see what the exact stitch is. So we'll count back 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And I'm going to go into that first stitch here with 2 double crochets. So there's the first one, which I will mark as the first stitch of this round. Would have been easier if I had a longer piece of yarn, but that will work. So that was the first one of the round, and we're going to go back into that exact same stitch and do our second double crochet. And then we're going to jump to the next stitch and do 2 double crochets into that stitch. So there's 1 and 2. And that's all this round is 2 double crochets into every single round. And at the end of the round, you should have 24 double crochets. So I will come back when I've made my way around. Okay, I've reached my stitch marker again. I just did my final 2 double crochets into that final stitch. I will remove my stitch marker. And for round 3, it's going to be, if I can actually get this stitch marker out, there we go. For round 3, it's going to be 2 double crochets into that first stitch that we just removed our marker from. So there's 1 and 2. Again, be sure to mark that first stitch. So I will go back and mark that first one. I already did my first 2. So I'll be sure to mark that first stitch. and 1 double crochet into the next stitch. Two double crochets into the next stitch. So there's 1 and 2 and 1 double crochet into the next stitch. So I'm going to repeat that all the way around. 2 double crochets into the next stitch, 1 double crochet into the next stitch, 2 into the next, 1 into the next. And I'm working on my final stitch of the round, which should end up being just 1 double crochet into that final stitch. So the second last stitch was the 2, and the last stitch should be the 1. If it's not, unfortunately, somewhere around the round, something got a little bit messed up. So just look back and make sure you were doing 2 stitches into 1 stitch and then 2 double crochets into the next 2 stitches. So again, we will remove our stitch marker, and for the final round here, it's going to be 2 double crochets into the first stitch, and I will just go back and mark that first stitch, but you should definitely take a moment to stop and mark it just so you don't forget. And then 1 double crochet into the next 2 stitches. So 1 into the next, 1 into the next. 2 double crochets into the next stitch. 1 and 2 right into that same stitch, and 1 double crochet into the next 2 stitches. So 1 into the next and 1 into the next. And again, I'm just going to repeat that all the way around, and I'll show you what I do when I make my way back around to the stitch marker that I'm going to go ahead and go back and put that in. Okay, I just completed my final stitch of this final round, and at this point you should have 48 double crochets all the way around, and your 2 stitches prior to that stitch marker should be 1 double crochet in each of those final 2 stitches, and that's how you know you did the round correctly. So at this point I'm going to remove my stitch marker, and on one of these circles I'm actually going to fasten off, and on the other one I'm not going to. So I will fasten off on this one by slip stitching to the first stitch of that round, or the stitch you just removed your marker from. Go right into it, yarn over, pull that yarn through the stitch, and pull that loop through the loop on your hook, like so. And then I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to cut my yarn, pull that yarn through, pull tight, and we are all fastened off. So to get started on this one, we're going to start by either starting with a slip knot on our hook, chaining 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, slip stitching to that first chain to form a ring, and chaining 1. And then we will work the stitches of round 1 into the center of the ring. And sometimes you have to kind of pull it apart a little bit just to see that opening, but that's where we would work the round 1 stitches into. So you can do it that way, or what I'm going to do is start with a magic ring. And I love using a magic ring, and I do recommend that you try it. I will show you how to do it here. I just find it a little bit easier to work those stitches into the center of the ring. So what I do is hold my yarn here between my pointer finger and my thumb, and I'm going to wrap that working end of the yarn around those 2 fingers and across that yarn that's on top of those two fingers. And then I'm going to hold that working yarn out of the way with my ring finger. So I have an X on top of my two fingers. And then I'm going to bring in my hook. I'm going to go underneath this side of the X and over top of this side of the X. And I'm going to grab that working yarn and pull it underneath. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to turn my hook. So that created a loop on my hook on top of that X. And then I'm going to grab that working yarn and chain one. Oh, there we go. And then I can remove this from my fingers, and I've created a magic ring. And this is going to be what we work those stitches into. And again, if you're having trouble with that, just feel free to do the chain 4, slip stitch to the first chain and chain 1 and work your stitches into that loop. That will work up just fine and it will look very nice. So we're going to start by doing 2 double crochets into the center of that ring, but on the second double crochet we're going to start or stop halfway through it. So we'll do 1 double crochet, and then again on the second one we're going to go into that ring, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops on your hook, and then I'm going to drop this white yarn and we're going to do a color change. So I put it forward in front of my work and kind of hold it in place with my thumb. And then I'm going to bring in my second color here, which again I'm using that green, and I'm going to loop that green on my hook, and I'm going to pull that loop through the 2 loops on my hook to complete that double crochet. And then every time after a color change, I grab the previous yarn that I was using and kind of give it just a little bit of a tug, and that will tighten that stitch like so. And now we're going to do the next stitch, and I'm going to work over top of this white yarn so I can use it again when I need it. And I will also work over top of this tail. Anytime you work over top of tails, it means less sewing in later, so it's always a bonus. So I'm just going to work on top of all those strands of yarn, and again I'm going to do half of a double crochet into the center of that ring in this green. So yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops on your hook, and prior to finishing that double crochet, again I'm going to drop that green yarn forward in front of my project. I'm going to hold it down with my thumb, and I'm going to pick up that white yarn again like so, and I'm going to complete this double crochet by pulling that white yarn through those 2 loops on my hook like so. And what we just did with the 2 white double crochets and the green double crochet, I'm going to do that 4 times total. So it will end up being a total of 12 double crochets into the center of that ring. So I'll show you again. I'm going to do a double crochet in the white, and then I'm going to do another double crochet, but prior to finishing that double crochet, so pulling through the first 2 loops on my hook, I'm going to drop that white yarn forward, and I'm going to pick up that green yarn that we've been working over top of. Make sure you're not grabbing the tail, but the working yarn itself. I'm going to loop that on my hook and pull that green yarn through to complete that double crochet. And now we will do our green stitch. So we have those 2 white. Now we're going to do our green. But prior to completing that green stitch, so we'll complete the double crochet until we have 2 loops on our hook. I'm going to bring that green yarn forward, pick up that white yarn again, and complete the stitch by pulling that white yarn through those 2 loops on my hook. Like so. So there's the second green line. And we're going to have, again, 4 total. So we just did our second set of the white, white, green, white, white, green. So we're going to do that 2 more times until, again, we have the total of 12 double crochets in the center. So double crochet in the white, double crochet in the white, but prior to completing that stitch, we drop that white yarn forward, kind of hold it in place with our thumb, pick up that green yarn, and finish this double crochet by pulling that green yarn through the stitch, and we've changed colors there. And now we will do our green double crochet, and we only ever want the 1 in this first round. So with the green, we're always stopping prior to completing that double crochet, dropping our yarn forward, holding it in place, picking up that white yarn and pulling that white yarn through to complete the stitch. And I'm just about at the end of the round anyway, so I will just show you that one last time. And you can see here that when you start using different colors and you're carrying the yarn around with you, as in we're working over top of that yarn, you can see that this yarn starts to get a little bit tangly. So every once in a while, just stop and make sure you're untangling that yarn just so it doesn't end up too tangled. And I'll just get that white yarn untangled, and there we go. The yarn is completely untangled and safe to work with again. If you keep working with it when it's already tangled, it's just going to become more and more tangled to the point that you're not able to use it. So one last time, we want those 2 white double crochets. So to do that, we do the first one, complete it as normal, but on our second double crochet, we're going to stop prior to completing that stitch, put our white yarn forward, pick up that green yarn, loop it onto our hook, and pull that green yarn through to complete the stitch. And for the final stitch, which will be the 12th double crochet into the center of this ring, we're going to yarn over into the center of the ring. But again, we're working on a green, so we're not going to complete it totally. We're going to put that working yarn forward and pick up the white yarn to complete the stitch, like so. And then at this point, I will just lift up that loop a little bit so it doesn't unravel. We're going to tighten the center of the ring. So if you started with a magic ring, we're just going to grab that white yarn and pull it as tight as you possibly can, and that will close up that center ring nicely. And if you still have a little bit of a gap, we can go around afterwards and sew that up. You can also give that green tail a little tug. It won't close it up, but it'll just make sure that it's nicely worked over top of. And even if you did the method where you chained 4, slip stitch to that first chain and chained 1, you can do the same where if you pull the tail, that should close up the center nicely. And again, if it does not, we can go around afterwards and sew around that center with one of the tails, and that will close it up completely. And at this point, we're going to go on to round 2. So for round 2, it's going to be 2 double crochets into every stitch all the way around, but in the green stitches, we want it to be green double crochets, and in the white stitches, we want it to be white double crochets. So in that first stitch of the round, we're going to do our 2 double crochets, but I'm going to go ahead and grab a stitch marker because we want to be marking the first stitch of each round. I couldn't find a stitch marker, so I'm just going to use a little piece of yarn here. So we want to go into the first stitch of round 1, the first double crochet, with 2 double crochets. So make sure you're not working into that original chain 1 that we did. That did not count as a stitch. We want to make sure that we're going into the first double crochet. So you can count back 12 stitches if you need to do that to see exactly where to put your hook. And again, we want to make sure we're bringing this green yarn with us. So kind of lift it up and place it over top of that stitch. So we're working over top of that as well. So we will just yarn over, go right into that first double crochet, and sometimes that one can be a little bit tight, but if you just, there we go, wiggle your hook there, you'll be able to get it through. Make sure I am working over top of that green yarn, and I will do my first of the 2 double crochets into that stitch, and I'm going to mark my first double crochet of round 2 with my stitch marker. There we go. Typically I secure that a little bit better, but because that one's long, I will just leave it like so. And that's the first stitch of round 2 marked. So again, we're going to do a second double crochet into that first stitch. And we're not going to switch to the green yarn on the second one like we did on round 2 because we're not yet at the green stitch. And again, it's only the green stitches that get the green double crochets into it. So the next stitch here will also get 2 double crochets into it. But on the second stitch, that's the one that we're going to stop halfway on and switch to the green. So we're always switching colors on the stitch right before the stitch that we need the color change for. So again, I'm going to drop my yarn forward, pick up that green yarn. Here, I'll get all these tails out of the way just so it's not confusing. Pick up that green yarn and pull that yarn through to complete the double crochet. And now we're good to work our green double crochets. So in the green one, it's just going to be 2 double crochets. But on the second double crochet, we'll stop when we have the 2 loops on our hook, green forward, held in place, pick up that white yarn and complete that double crochet. And that's what I'm going to work all the way around. And again, it's very important that every once in a while, if you're not doing it after each stitch, to just pause and grab that second colored yarn and give it a tug until you feel resistance, and that will just make sure that it's working along nicely and there's not loose bits everywhere or anything like that. So I just give that a tug and we go on to the next stitch. 2 double crochets in the white in the next stitch. There's 1 and 2 and 2 double crochets into the next stitch, but because we need that color change for the green stitch, we're going to stop on that second double crochet in the white, drop our yarn forward to the front, hold it in place, grab that green yarn, and complete the double crochet like so. And that's what we're going to repeat all the way around. Again, I'm going to grab that white yarn and give it a tug until I feel quite a bit of resistance, and we can keep working on. And I'm going to go ahead and complete the rest of the round off camera. All it is 2 stitches into each stitch all the way around, 2 double crochets, I should say, into each stitch all the way around. And when we get to a green double crochet, we want the 2 double crochets into that stitch to be green. And in the white double crochets, we want the 2 double crochets in each of those stitches to be white. And it's always the stitch right before you need the color change that you switch colors. I hope that makes sense, and I will see you when I've made my way around. And again, on the final stitch of the round, we're going to switch back to that white yarn. So drop that green yarn forward, pick up that white yarn, and give that green yarn a tug once again, and we're ready to go for round 3. So I will remove my stitch marker, and for round 3, it's going to be 2 double crochets in that first stitch, 1 double crochet in the next, 2 double crochets in the next stitch, 1 double crochet in the next. And again, it's the exact same for each round, where the only difference in that pattern is when you need to be using the green yarn versus the white yarn. So in the white yarn, all the stitches will be white, and in the green yarn, all the stitches will be green. So again, make sure you're marking the first stitch of the round. And make sure you're untangling as you go. And we'll do our second double crochet into that first stitch and 1 double crochet into that next stitch. Whoops. Do that one again. And 2 double crochets into the next stitch. Still working over top of that green yarn, you can see. And 1 double crochet into the next stitch, but I know that's the final stitch prior to the green, so I know that's the stitch that I need to change my color on. So I'll drop that white yarn, pick up that green, and complete the double crochet with the green, and then start working in the green stitches. 2 double crochets into the next stitch. And 1 double crochet into the next. Again, it's the stitch prior to the next color. So I'm going to drop the green yarn and complete that stitch with the white. And just repeat that. 2 double crochets into the next stitch, 1 into the next, 2 into the next, 1 into the next, and we'll change our color. 2 into the next, 1 into the next, and we'll change our color. And that's what we're going to do all the way around. All right, I've made my way back around. I changed to the white yarn after that final stitch. I've reached my stitch marker here, so I'm going to remove that. And for the fourth and final round of the main portion of this coaster here, it's going to be 2 double crochets in that first stitch, but I will mark the first stitch once again. So that was the first one, and I'll do the second one. Give that green yarn a tug. And then it's going to be 1 double crochet in the next 2 stitches. So 1 double crochet into the next stitch, 1 double crochet into the next stitch, and then 2 double crochets into the next stitch. 1, and 2, and then 1 double crochet over the next 2 stitches, so 1 into the next stitch and 1 into the next stitch. But I know that on this one I need to switch colors because it's the one right before the green, so I'll finish that double crochet with the green. And now we've reached the green. But again, it's just 2 double crochets into the next stitch, and 1 double crochet into the next 2 stitches. So 1 into the next, and 1 into the next, but I know that I have to change colors on this one. And we're just going to repeat that all the way around. 2 double crochets into the next stitch, 1 double crochet into the next 2 stitches, 2 double crochets into the next stitch, 1 double crochet into the next 2 stitches. We'll change color on that final one before the green and repeat. So I'm going to do that all the way around, and then I will show you how we go on to the next step. Right, I'm coming to my final stitch of the round, and we are going to change colors again at the end of this round. Even though this is kind of the end of the main portion of this, we do want to change back to that white because we're going to slip stitch to the first stitch of the round. So going right into that first double crochet using the white, we're going to go into that stitch, pull up a loop, and bring that loop through the loop on your hook for a slip stitch. And then I'm just going to chain 1. And at this point, I'm just going to lift up that loop on my hooks just so my work doesn't unravel, because we don't want to fasten off at this point. We're going to use this yarn again when we connect the 2 circles. So I'm just going to lift up that loop, do nothing else, leave the green and the white yarn attached. So at this point, you want to bring in your other circle here, or the front piece of the coaster, and I'm just going to turn my work over and I'm going to sew in this end. So remember I mentioned that if you do end up with a little bit of a gap here, like you can see I have on this one, all I'm going to do is bring in my sewing needle I'm just going to attach my yarn needle here and work that tail around these stitches around the center opening. So I'm actually working through those round 1 stitches, and all I'll do is go through a couple at a time, pull that yarn through, and give it a tug. Go through a couple more stitches. And these ones can be quite tight, but if you just kind of wiggle it through a couple at a time, that will be the easiest way to do it. Pull that yarn through. And again, pull tight. And I'm just going to keep working this all the way around, and once you make your way around, and if you keep giving it a tug, you'll be able to close up that center. All right, I got all of my sewing finished. You can see that center opening. I got it to where I'm comfortable with. And then all I did is cut the tail a little bit shorter, and I did the same on the back side of this piece. So what we're going to do at this point is bring the 2 sides together, and we're going to face the wrong side towards each other. So you can see on the outside it will be the right side of the white piece and the right side of the piece with the green. And the wrong sides will be facing towards each other. And then I'm just going to turn the work, and I'm going to insert my hook back into that loop that I lifted up to make sure that it did not unravel. And we're going to work on sewing or stitching these 2 pieces together. So I'm going to start by putting my hook through that stitch that we slip stitched into on this front piece. So the stitch that's right below the chain 1, I'm going to go right into that stitch. And again, I'm going to be working over this green because we're going to need it when we do the stitches over the green here. So just like we were doing with the main, when we were working up this circle of working over top of the yarn that's not in use, we're going to do the same when we're stitching these 2 pieces together. So I've put my hook into that stitch on the front piece, and I'm also going to put my hook through any of the stitches all the way around on the back piece. Because this piece doesn't have any green, it really doesn't matter what stitch that you start in, but I will just start in I'll just go ahead and start in the stitch that we slip stitched to. So I will put my hook into that stitch as well, like so. And then I'm going to single crochet. So I'll do that by pulling that yarn through both of those stitches, so through the stitch on the back piece and through the stitch on the front piece, and completing my single crochet like so. And that was our first stitch. And then I'm going to go through the next stitch on this front piece and the next stitch on the back piece. And if you look here, this little stitch right here is actually the slip stitch with the chain 1. So I'm just going to skip over that entirely because that is not a stitch. It was just well, I guess it is a stitch. It's the slip stitch, but it didn't count in the 48 stitches all the way around. So I'm going to skip over that and jump to this next available stitch. And I'm actually going to put the tail into the center, just because once it's all sewn up, you won't even see that. So jump to the next available stitch over on this side. Again, working over top of this green yarn. I'm going to pull the yarn through both of those stitches and complete my single crochet. Again, jumping to the next stitch on the front piece and the next stitch on that back piece, pulling the yarn through both of those stitches, completing my single crochet. I'll show you one more time here. Into the next stitch on the front piece, the next stitch on that back piece. Make sure you're catching both of those loops on that back piece as well, pulling the yarn through both of those stitches, completing my single crochet. And again, just like we did on this piece, every once in a while, just give that green yarn or whatever yarn is not in use a tug. And you don't need to do this too hard, just until you feel some resistance, and that's just to make sure it's not getting all bunched up. It's just going to be nice and seamless all the way around. So I'm going to keep working the white stitches here. Actually, I'll just stay on camera until I get to the green, and then I will show you what to do at that point. So next stitch on the front piece, next stitch on the back piece, pull the yarn through both of those stitches and complete your stitch. Next stitch on the front, next stitch on the back, pull the yarn through both of those stitches, complete your single crochet. And I just have one more to do in the white, and then we're going to switch to the green, and I'll show you how to do that. So again, next stitch on the front piece, next stitch on the back piece, pull the yarn through and complete your single crochet. And again, I'm going to give that green yarn a little tug. And now we want to change colors. So I'm going to go into that next stitch, still with the white. I'll go into that next stitch right before the green, into the next stitch on that back piece, pull the yarn through both of those stitches, and when you have those two loops on your hook, that's when you drop that white yarn again to the front. I'm just going to hold it in place with my thumb, and I'm going to pick up that green yarn and complete my single crochet in the green. And now at this point, we'll start working over this white yarn. So go into the next stitch, which is the first green stitch there, the next stitch on the back, and work your single crochet through both of those stitches. So it's pretty much that all the way around. The only difference is we're working single crochets around, so when you change your yarn, when you have those two loops on your hook, that's when you change your yarn. But otherwise it's the same, that in the stitch prior to the color change, you complete half of your single crochet, and then that's when you switch to the other color. Again, give that white yarn a tug, next stitch on the front piece, next stitch on the back piece, pull the yarn through both of those stitches, and complete your single crochet. And I'll just show you a color change one more time. Into the next stitch on the back piece. Again, making sure you got those two loops on your hook. Complete your single crochet. And now we're in the stitch before the white, so we know that's the stitch we need to do the color change in. I'll go into that stitch, into the next stitch on that back piece, pull up a loop. When you have those two loops on your hook, you drop that green yarn forward, hold it with your thumb, grab the white yarn, complete your single crochet. And now we're good to start working the white single crochets, working over top of that green yarn until this part where we'll change the color again. So I'm just going to keep working that all the way around. And the final one, which we are going to change back to that white yarn. So go through that final stitch on that front piece, put my hook down, and grab that final stitch on the back piece. And once again, we are going to switch to that white yarn. So I will put that green yarn forward and grab that white yarn and complete my single crochet. And then I am really close to being out of yarn here, but I'm going to slip stitch to that first single crochet that we made when we started joining. So you'll see that we have that slip stitch there, and then that chain one. We're just going to skip over top of that and slip stitch to the first actual single crochet of the round. There we go. And then I will slip stitch. This is so difficult for me just because I've really run out of yarn, but I'm going to try to make it work. So I pulled the yarn through that stitch and through the loop on my hook, and then I'm going to chain one. Let's see if I can make that work. There we go. And then pull that tight. And at this point you would cut your yarn prior to pulling that tight and then pull it tight, but I have really cut it close with my yarn, but I made it happen. So you can see here, it's looking very nice, and I think the back looks nice and clean. You have your little sections of green. You can see a little bit of that green poking through those white stitches, but I think it looks really nice. And at this point, you can either go in with a yarn needle and sew in all of these ends in the stitches, but all I'm going to do, because again, you're not even going to see the center or the middle of the work, it's all going to be on the inside between these two pieces. So all you have to do is anywhere on the back of the project, you can stick your hook into any stitch there, and then I'm just going to lift my hook up. I'm making sure I'm not going through the other side, but staying in the center. I'll lift my hook up and grab those tails one by one, and then just pull it into the center of the project. And you can go in again just to make sure there's enough in there that it won't come unraveled. Pull it back down into the center, like so. And once you've done that with all of them, all you have to do is give it a little tug, cut it close to the project there, and then if you move around your project, that's all hidden in the center. So I'm going to do that off camera, but that's all I'm going to do for these ones as well. Now I want to bring in this one and talk about it. I'm not going to show you the entirety of it on camera because it's made the exact same way that I made this one, but I just have a third color in the mix. So when I first do that round of initial 12 double crochets, on this one, if you remember, we did 2 double crochets and then we switched to our green yarn and did 1 double crochet. Then we did 2 in the white, switched to the green and did 1 green. On this one, I changed colors after every single double crochet on that initial round of 12. So I started with my white yarn. I did 1 double crochet, but prior to pulling my yarn through those final 2 loops, I picked up the green yarn and completed that double crochet. Did the same with the green. I did a double crochet, but prior to completing it, I switched to the red, and so on. So I did my initial round of 12 double crochets by switching color after each single double crochet. But other than that, with each round, I just did the same thing. The pattern itself is the same. So for that round 2, it was 2 double crochets in each stitch around, but I made sure in the white double crochets, I was using the white yarn. In the green double crochets, I was using the green yarn, and in the red double crochets, I was using the red. And it was always the stitch prior to when I needed that color changed for that I would switch colors. But other than that, you can rewind if you need to see the steps of each round because that all stays the same. And again, I made the same back piece. I even single crocheted the 2 pieces together. I carried the 2 colors not in use until I needed them. Everything was done exactly the same. So feel free to introduce that 3rd color if you like the look of this one better. And we're all done our coaster. I've brought in all of my other ones here. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you would like to make these as well and add it to your set of coasters, I've linked the tutorial in the description box. But otherwise, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!